Before we dive into the exciting world of React, let's talk about some prerequisites that will set you up for success in this course. To make the most out of this journey, it's essential to have a solid understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, especially for client-side programming. Basically, HTML forms the structure for your web pages, CSS adds stylings and visual appeals, and JavaScript brings interactivity and dynamic functionality to your applications. Knowing these fundamentals will not only help you grasp React's concept more easily, but also enable you to build powerful and responsive web applications. React is just a JavaScript library for building user interfaces, which means it builds upon the foundations laid by HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Without a solid understanding of these technologies, you might find yourself struggling to follow along the concepts we will be covering. So, if you're feeling confident in your HTML and CSS and JavaScript skills, you are ready to take your web development journey to the next level with React. Otherwise, I will highly recommend you to stop this video, go and have some basic tutorials about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript first, then come back and finish this one. Okay, so let's get started. Now let's look at the tools that you will need to work with React. So firstly, you need an editor. So if you're not familiar with what editor is, it's basically a program that can help you write your code. It's like, for example, you need an Excel sheet to make your tables, or you need a Word file to write your text. Same for coding, you need a tool where you can write your code. Okay, so I'm using Visual Studio Code at the moment for writing my code. I feel it's so helpful and to have a lot of benefits when you're going more experience with development. It's just a lot of built-in tools and helpers for you. If you think this tool is too big and too much overwhelming, please feel free to find other ones just simpler and easier, and they have very simple interface. For example, you can use Sublime Text as well. It's also another editor tool that can help you write your code in it. So feel free to choose any one of these two. There are a lot of out there as well, so feel free to choose any one that you're feeling confident with. Okay, so this is a tool that you will need to write your code in. Okay, so for me, I'm using Visual Studio Code. As I said, I just downloaded it. They have Mac version, they have Linux version, so you can download the version that suits you the best. Okay, now the next thing you will need is a Node.js to be installed on your machine. And for that, you just need to head to nodejs.org and then download the latest at the time you're watching this video. So all what it will do is to just download it and to install it will run and install on your machine, and that's it. Okay, now done with the tools, let's go to the React. So for React, before 2024, when React just started, we had to write a lot of code just to make our setup to get started. And why is that? Because React basically, it's just an HTML and JavaScript, which basically our web will not understand, and you have to write some configuration that will translate your code into plain JavaScript that your browser understands, which is so complex things that I don't want to go into for this beginner course. Lucky for you, now there are already boilerplates ready for you. You can just go and install them and get started. Okay, so the two biggest famous ones at the moment is you have Create React App, which was there from ages now. So you can just run a command in your terminal and it will just install a boilerplate ready for you. Or you can also use Next.js, okay, which is also a framework you can see here, which can help us also get started with a ready package. We can just go and get started writing our code as well. For today's video, we'll be using Next.js to get started. Just keep in mind, this video is purely React. We'll be learning everything about React only, nothing related to the Next.js itself, but we are just using it to get started with our project. Okay, so just keep in mind, whatever you learn today will be applicable to any other framework you use for React, to any other boilerplate you use. Okay, so you can see in documentation, you can get started simple as you just run this command in your terminal. So just copy that one. Okay, now let's get started. Let's get our project created. So first thing we need to create our boilerplate to get started. So npx create next app, then I'll say add latest, and add latest means I just wanted to install the latest version of my current time of recording. Okay, so when you are watching this video and you're doing so, you may have a different versions. So latest and space, and I will add my folder name. I'll call this my app, and let's say not even my app, just say app. You can call anything you want, and I'll hit enter. I did a mistake. Okay, so it's not npm, it's npx, and I'll hit enter. And as I hit enter, because it's a built-in boilerplate, it will ask me a few questions to help me go through my configuration easily. Okay, and because this is a full beginner project, I don't want to use TypeScript, I want to use only JavaScript. So I'm saying no. ESLint again, it just helped me to monitor my code and help me write a better code. This video is not about that, but I'll still keep it yes. In my next videos, I'll explain how does work. Tailwind CSS, basically it's just a built-in library with ready classes to style. So I'll just say yes for this video, but I will not be using it really because I want to teach you everything about React. So I'll just say yes. Would you like to use SRC directory? I'll say yes. That's where I want to put my components. Would you like to use app router? Again, this is a full beginner course. I'll be covering app routers in my next videos, but it's just recommended. So just keep it yes for default. It will not add any problems. And everything else, I'll just say no. So basically what we'll do is we'll just install all the npm packages I need to get my application started. Okay, now my packages are installed, so I can just do cd, and I call my folder app, right? So I'll just do cd app to go in my project. And now because I'm using Visual Studio Code, the biggest benefit of it is a lot of shortcuts. It can help you easily use it. One of them is just code dot, and that's basically I'm saying open my Visual Studio Code in this folder. As I hit enter, my Visual Studio Code will comes up, and my project, I can see it full right here. Okay, now if don't be this overwhelming first time you're using Visual Studio Code, you can easily just go and open the Visual Studio Code. Okay, and you can go here to file and open folder, and then just put the route of the project where you want to go. Okay, and then just select folder and you'll open it for you. Okay, simple as that. Now I'll just close these and let's look at the structure of our application. Okay, so first thing is we have here this config, so please just ignore it. It's just because I add the Tailwind. I said yes, which is a built-in CSS library, something like a Bootstrap, if you know Bootstrap. So just ignore that one. The other things we have, which is more important, the packages JSON, and that's all your configuration of your application is. And here you can see here we have dependencies, that's the things we're using. So of course we're using React. You need React DOM, which is another library to write your React code. And because we use the Next.js framework, so of course we have Next here as well. Now the dev dependencies are basically other libraries you'll be using, but just during your development, and that's what they're called, dev dependencies. Okay, don't feel overwhelmed. All these things you don't need, and that's the benefits now of 2024. And maybe after, things are much easier. Okay, you don't need to know all these things. You just need to know how to get started. And during our course and next courses, you will get a better understanding on what these things do and how to get them configured for the best benefit of your development. Now, the other thing you see here is the scripts. So the scripts basically are the commands you need to run for some specific things. Okay, like dev command if to run your project locally in your machine and use it while developing. Building is to run the production version and build it for you so you can push it to production. Start if you want to run your locally but the production version locally. And lint, basically it just help you to lint your code and make sure your code is clean. Okay, now the other thing you see here, the package.log, that's just a generated from package.json. Okay, so there's nothing for you in there. We never touch it. Whenever you install your packages, this one gets updated. Okay. The other thing you have here is your next config, and at the moment it's empty and we don't want to touch it as well. Just because we're using Next.js, it has its own config file. The other thing you have here is ESLint.json as well, and that is configuration for ESLint that helps you to monitor your code, okay, and make sure your code is clean. Also here we didn't add anything yet because that's not the purpose of this video, but it just comes with the boilerplate we installed as well. So there's no use for add for learning as well. The other thing you see here is the node modules, and that's whenever you have an npm project and you install it, you'll have this node module generated which hold all these npm packages for you, okay, which also you never touch as well. It generates by itself whenever you install npm packages. Now the public folder is basically anything you need to access publicly, and your config does not run on top of it, doesn't rebuild it or anything, okay? So if you have any public assets, images or pictures that you want to access publicly, you may want to put them there, but again, that's not the conversation of this video as well, so we are not touching that. Now you have the source, and that's where everything is, and that's where you will be writing your React code, okay? But before I do that, let's enough talking, maybe let's run this one first in our browser and see what we have at the moment, okay? So I have in my Visual Studio Code, I have a built-in terminal, and I will use that. Otherwise you can just use your machine terminal as well. And what I will do, I'll say npm, and we have access to this npm. Remember we installed the Node.js on your machine. When we install it, it gives us access to something called npm, which helps us to run our applications. Now say npm run and then dev, and if you remember, that's the dev right there in our script, okay, and it will help us to run our application on our local machine. So npm run dev, you can see here it's started in your local, in localhost 3000, okay. Now what I will do, I will go here and I'll say localhost 3000. Now you must be wondering where all this came from. Okay, so as you can see here, already they're giving you hints. So this, I get started by editing source/app/page.js. Okay, so let's go to our project, and that is the one, source/app/page.js. So when I click this, you can see there is a lot of code here. And if you're new to this, it may look overwhelming, but trust me, it's just too simple. Basically, you have here a JavaScript thing. If you're familiar with JavaScript, it's a function. But the thing which is might be weird for your first time is you have in same file JavaScript, and also you have HTML code as well. And that is the cool thing about React, okay? It may be overwhelming, but trust me, you will love this, and you will love how much powerful it can be as well. So all what we are doing now is that we're just writing a function, and that function basically returns some HTML content for us, okay? So don't take me wrong when I say HTML. I'm keeping this is simple for you, but in future parts of this course, understand what it is, okay? So let's keep it in simple language at the moment. So you have a function which is returning some HTML for you. Now let me put these pages next to each other. I want to show you one more cool thing about this as well. Now let me make this one small, and let's just put them next to each other. Okay, now what I will do here, I'll just change the text here, okay? I will say here. Okay, now what I will do, I'll click save. And as soon as I click save, you can see here my text immediately changed in the browser. I didn't hard refresh or even anything by my actual cursor. It just happened by itself, and that is the amazing thing when you use the built-in frameworks. It has something behind the scene which is called hard reloading, okay, which basically what it does is whenever you do a change in your code and you save, it will immediately hard reload and display your new change in the browser immediately. Okay, one more thing, let me explain you what this export means in the lane 4. Okay, so this export basically is not related to React. It is a pure JavaScript functionality. So if you come from a JavaScript development background, you'll be already have an idea what this does. But let me go to this one very quick. So export basically help us to create something called modules. Okay, and what does modules for us basically? It's just their functions that we can access from other modules or other files in our project. Okay, now for example here this home, okay, it is just a function, but we are exporting it, we are making it available to all our application. We can go to any other JavaScript file and access this function. And how you can do that, you can just use something like you see in line 1 and 2, you just use something called import. Okay, and don't worry, this will be looking maybe something weird in the beginning, but as we go into the course, this is how you do, that's how you create each and every piece of code in your React. And then it will be just a way of doing your work, okay? So now let's get started and let's clean up this because we don't need this. So what we'll be doing, we'll be building a simple application and that we will take from the Friends and Mentor. They have some challenges. Some of them are free and some of them are paid. So we're taking a free one to start with to learn in this video today. So first thing we have to do is just create a header. And good thing is that they have Figma file and if you want to practice your styling and all that stuff, they have a full access, a free one to the Figma file as well. So I'll just zoom in. So this also we will be building. We will not do this much complex. We just have a header, which we'll have to do and a background image on it. And then beneath it, we'll have this list of to-dos. Okay. Now, let's go back to our code. So we have the page.js, that's the entry for our application. Okay, so what we will do, I'll just clean up all this and let's create our first component. Okay, so the way you do create a component in React, and if component doesn't make sense to you, React basically is based on a component. It's like you're building a Legos, okay? And you need a tiny Legos, right, to keep building on top of them. Basically, those tiny Legos or the Legos, bigger ones, they are those components, okay? So React basically follow this base of components. You build small pieces and then you call them inside of each other, okay? And this may sound a bit also confusing, but trust me, as soon you get a hand of it, it is really easy to do. So every component, every piece of your Lego is just simply a function in JavaScript. Only thing that function, it give us back something called JSX, okay, which is that HTML in JavaScript thing. Now, I start with const, okay, to declare, of course, my function. Then I have my function name. I'll just call it for now index, okay. Then we'll be using the new JavaScript, the ECMAScript, and we'll be defining my function using an arrow function style, okay. I'll not use a function keyword. So the way you do it is just like this. And now I have my function, okay? Now, as we said, the components in React return some HTML content thing, which is JSX. So you have to do return and whatever your HTML content you need to render, okay? Let's say for now, hi world. That's all I'm returning. Now, I created my function. If I go and try to look at my screen, I'll run localhost 3000. It says the default export is not in React component in page slash. And I hope by looking at this message, you know what we missed. So what we have missed is that we created our function, we created our component, but we did not create the export for it. Do you remember the module we were talking about? Whenever you create a component, you have to export it to make it available to your application. So we say export default. So by default, that's my export. I'll say index. Now let's go back to my browser. And there we go. I can say hello world. Now, the other point you may be wondering how I export it, but I did not really call it from another file. That's because it was already done. We didn't add the page itself. The page was already there, right? We just clean it up and write it again, but has been imported somewhere else in our application. Okay, now let's create our first component. Should be just a header at the moment, and that header will simply have a to-do text in it, okay, and a background image. So let's start with creating this header component. So we'll go back to our application, and the way in the standard how you do it is that you create a component folder, and then you put all your small components inside that folder for better organization of your project. So I'll go in my source folder. I'll add a new folder called component. Again, this is just a standard, but if you don't want to do so, you don't have to. And inside my component folder, I'll create my new component. I will call it header at the moment. So I'll create another folder inside called header. Okay, so one rule you have to keep in mind is that the name of your component always should start with a capital letter. Okay, then you can call them anything you want, but just make sure the first letter it is a capital letter. Now, inside my header folder, I'll create a file where I'll write my component. It's called index, okay, then .jsx, okay. As I put JSX, you can see my Visual Studio Code is showing me this icon. It's telling me that this file will be for a React component. If I remove the X, then it will become just some simple JavaScript, okay. Put my X there and enter. So my file is created. Now I have to create my first component. So it will be simple, as I said, again, the component, I just take them like a functions in JavaScript. It's just the return type, which is a little bit different, okay, to start with. Now, you have to declare it, so const, and we'll be using the arrow functions. We'll not be using the function keyword, but we'll be using the new type of JavaScript functions. So they're called arrow functions. So const, I'll give the name, I'll just call it index, and it will be an arrow function. Okay, now this arrow function I declared, all what will return for me at the moment is just a heading with to do or to do application. You can call your heading anything you want. So return, I'll say h1 for now, and I'll say to do application, for example. Okay. Then we created now our component. We have to make it available to all our application. So I have to export it. So export default index. So whatever name you give right there, you have to export it here, okay? And save. Now, even if I go to my application, it won't be there. We still see the old message we put in the first time in the page.js. And reason why is that because we didn't import this file in our page.js, okay? So you can't just create them. You have to import them within whatever the root component which is available to the browser. So at the moment in current boilerplate we're using, it is page.js. So I will just remove that text from there. Okay, I will say it is header. But again, I say it is header, but I didn't import it here, so I have to make sure I do import it. So import header from, and if you can see here, I have to jump one level up and then access components header. So slash components slash header, save. Let's go back to our page and there we go. You can see your to-do application right there, okay? Now, even for example, you must be wondering why you just point to the folder but not the file itself. Because I'm using the built-in boilerplate of Next.js, it's already handle this pattern where you can create the folder names for your components, and inside you just have to make sure you're using index.jsx if you're using JavaScript, or index.tsx. So just make sure always you have that index, okay? So it will pick it up by default as the component for that folder which is in above it, okay? Now I can even do this slash index and save. And if I go back to my web application, you can see here it is complaining, and I think I did a mistake here, which I did. Um, I removed the header. I should do slash header slash index, go back and go back to my browser, and still it will be working. Okay, it just for the readability of your components. I mean, you don't have to do this. even this one is working. So less code, less text in your component. Okay, so there we go. You have created your first component in React. So not bad, right? It's very easy. It's very simple. Okay. Okay, now our component is created. We need to style it and start to look at make look more prettier and friendly. So I'll show you all the options or the most options you have in styling, and just so you know all of them. But again, each project and each place of working is different and they use different methods. Okay, so the first one is using a generic global CSS file, which is one file that you will create, and that file basically will be just .css file, and then you can add it to the root of your application. In my current recording, because I'm using Next.js boilerplate, so either I can add it in page.js or I can add it in the layout.js, okay? Which you can see here for me is already added right there. Now, what I can do, I can just remove this one from here because I don't need it. And I can just here and create some class. So let's try to style our heading, and let's just add a basic style. I'll say h1 color is white and background is black. Okay, just so we can learn the style options, but actually style as for Figma we'll do later. Okay, now I go back to my browser and we can see there it's the sign is applied. If we debug it, and you can see here that's h1 and my style is coming from layout.css. So even though it's a global.css, but because I import it in my layout.js, it is acting as a different file name for me. Okay, and that's just because the way it's Next.js is working. Now, this is the way you can do for a global styling, okay, which is not really highly recommended, but you'll be still seen to use, for example, to add some global things, for example, a font, font families, and font weight, and so on, okay? Now, the other approach is using styles that will load only for certain components that it needed, okay? Like in the one we did now, because we add a generic global CSS file, even all the CSS there they are in that file we don't need, they'll be also loaded in your application, which may and can impact the performance. And most of the time, most of the CSS there, you don't need it until some certain page is loaded or certain components are visible to the customer. So the best way to do it, they have many approaches again, but one of them is called the modular CSS. And the way you can do that, so I can go back, for example, to my folder where I create my components. I will add a new file, and I'll just call it, for example, header.module.css. Okay, and what we'll do now, I will add a class here, for example, .heading, and I'll say that heading will have color white and background color is black. Okay, I'll delete the one here because I don't need this one anymore. And then what we can do, we create our module CSS. I'll go back to my component and I'll import that CSS. And you will not import it as a string, but you'll import it as an object in JavaScript. So import styles. These styles, you can call it anything you want from. And I have my file created in the same root of my component. So just there. Now we imported our CSS file as an object, and how we can apply this style to my HTML elements. Simple as you define a class name. So in JavaScript, in React, you don't use a class, a property name, but you use a class name, okay? Then it will not be equal to a string, but to an object. And then you can call styles in there, okay? Styles dot then the class name you have created right there, which is for me heading. Okay, so let's save this, go back to our browser, and there we go. You can see my style is applied. Okay, to double check it's not coming from my global CSS. If you see the H1, you can see there is like a random style title is there. It's not the one really we created dot heading, which should be a heading only here, but it's different. Okay, and that is automatically generated for us when our builder or our Webpack is running behind the scene. So what it does, you can see here the structure is a header.
Okay, that's the component from what you call it, then your class name, and then some random number there. Okay, and if you see on the right side, that's our style is coming. Now, the good thing about this method is your CSS, if you have a huge component, a lot of CSS, it will only load that style when it is needed, okay? It will not load all the time with your application, even if it's that component is not on the screen, okay? So this is the benefit of using the module.css. There are other approaches as well which help you with this benefit, which called style in GSS. So basically, it is a way to write your styles within an object, and then you just use them again, same thing within your component. And one of the most famous ones and common ones from ages now is styled components. So that is a library they can use to build CSS in JavaScript. And you can see here with an example, and you will understand why it is called like that. So basically, you just declare a constant, and then you use the style library with the elements of your HTML. Then you can apply the styles you want. Okay. The amazing thing is that all these styles also support the hover, for example, the active, the focus. Even you can check the properties of your component and do a conditional styling as well. As for this today course, because we are not talking about CSS, but just an overall idea about everything to get started, we will not be going in depth about this, but you should have really idea about all your options, and this is commonly used within all the projects in real-time world. And just maybe look at from my next videos, I'll be having a full tutorial on how to use these styled components. Here we go, you have few options on how to use CSS. Now the last one, or maybe it's not the last, but it's something to add on, is there are other options as well that you can use, which are the third-party libraries. Okay, so you have a lot of them like Bootstrap, you have Tailwind CSS, there is something called Style, so many options which they give you built-in classes ready for you to use, and you can also build your own theme on top of those. So those, they are very easy, to be honest, to build in within your project. It's just for each library, a third library you use, of course you have to learn how to use it, how, what classes you have, how you can have their configuration done for your own projects and so on. Okay, so again, this is a full other topic that we can't cover in today's video, but it's just option for you again to know how, what options you have for your styling. Okay, now let's go back to our project. So we have now our heading. Let's go actually and style it properly to little bit look like the one we have in our Figma. Okay, so first thing I need to get the image. So what I have done, I imported an image from my Figma file and I put it under my public folder. And then in my CSS, what have I done? I set it as a background image, and background size is covered so it fill full my H1 element. And then of course the color of my text was white in my Figma, and then I just add some padding. Okay, so I'm not doing any pixel perfect uh, designs for this course. I'm just showing you how you can add some style. Though this is not the best way, but this is an option to start with if you're just starting with React. Okay, now let's look at our UI, and there we go. So our text is white and we have the list, the background image set up for us. Okay, now let's talk about something called props in React. So let's say, for example, that now we create a component called banner, right? And all what it does for us is just return us a banner with a text on it. Let's say we have another page, okay, which I want the same banner, only the text will be different. So thing come in your mind is that if you're using normal JavaScript, you use a same function, right? Because doing the same code. Only that function need to accept some arguments, okay? Same thing in React. So in React, props, which is short for properties, are used to pass some data from one component, which is the parent, to another, which is child component, okay? So think of them like a parameters that you pass to a function. So these props allow you to make your component more dynamic and reusable. So let's see how we can do this in our example now. So I'll open my Visual Studio Code. So currently we have this header component that we created, or the banner, right? But we call it header. Calling that header from page.js. Let's say, for example, you have another page. I don't have now, but for sake of demo, I want this header to display not this to-do application, but I wanted to say hello world, for example, okay? So we can pass something here, which called properties, and you can call this property anything you want. But I highly recommend you to use always namings that make sense to you, okay? So let's say, for example, text, okay? That's the only thing I have there at the moment. And that text, you can assign anything you want as well, depending on what you need. But for the start, I'm only using for a plain text, which is string, and you can pass the text that you want right there, okay? So let's say I want to say hello world, okay? Now I have to make sure that my header components can understand this property I passed right there. So I can go here, and you remember we declared as an arrow function because again, React components are just functions. I will pass my argument here. I will pass something called props, okay? Again, you can call this anything you want. It's just standard ways of namings. So I'm using props, okay? Now if I come here, I can select my props, save, go back to my browser, open my console. I'll just hard refresh. So as I hard refresh, you can see here I have a console log, that's my props, and I have an object which I will call a property text, okay? So that property text is coming from the property we passed right there from the page.js, okay? Let's, for example, I call this one heading. Again, I'll have same thing. I'll go back to my browser and you can see here that's the heading, okay, and that's the value. So what we will do, I want my code, okay, to read that heading and display it for me. So the way we can do it inside this to-do application, it will not be any more hard-coded, but this component will be a reusable piece of code that will accept this heading property or string from a parent component all the time. So I can do props dot heading. Okay, click save, go back to my browser, and you can see here now I have hello world, okay, which is coming from my parent component as a property or a prop for my header component. Okay, so this is another way. Another thing you can do with prop is that you can destructure it, okay, so which is can be really handy sometimes, so you can know what your component is expected. So instead of having a generic object name right there, you can literally write all the props manually. So I can come here and say heading, okay, inside an object, and I'll just remove these props from here because I don't have it anymore. I click save, I go back to my browser and see it's still working. I'll even hard refresh and it is working right there. Okay, now another thing is, for example, let's say that we call this component somewhere, okay, and no one passes heading value, okay, and you want to have always a default value to work for you in case if someone don't pass it on, okay. So you can come here, and when you pass this heading here in the props, okay, or the arguments, you can set it up there to a default value. I will say, for example, I'm missing, for example, okay. I'll save this, then I'll go to my page, okay, and I'll add another instance of my component. So when you have more than one level element with HTML, then you can just do return like this. I have to do parentheses, and then you need a wrapper element. You only can have one child HTML element, so you can add one, okay, and then inside as many you want. So I'll add two, and one of them I'll remove the heading property. Okay, click save. So basically you can see here we have two headings. So I'm expected to see two headings in my UI. One should have the default text, which is I'm missing, and other one should have hello world. So let's save this. Let's go back to our browser, and there we go. I'm missing, and this is the hello world as well there. Okay, so you can see how the React is so powerful. You'll have an understanding really why it is so powerful. It's because it can help you if you write it in proper way to be very reusable, and you can use like same piece of UI everywhere in your application if you set up the architecture properly for it. Now, this is with properties. One thing also you have to keep in mind is, which a lot of developers do a mistake with it, is Keep in mind whatever properties you pass down, so when you pass them to your child component which reads it, those properties you should not change them, okay? You can't modify them. That is a strict rule in React,